Welcome back, Michael.
Welcome back.
I think we're going to record something called Holiday Buffet.
Holiday buffet it is. So we're going to cover both holidays, Christmas and Thanksgiving. So instead of last year we did the Thanksgiving buffet, I figured this year, because we're a little behind, we could just go in a holiday buffet, group those into one, and talk about some things that are on the uptick at any time that we approach the holidays this time of year. We typically, when we get into the warm season, we think of, the patients that'll come in with a higher risk of hyperthermia, and then you have the cold season where patients are a higher risk of hypothermia, and then you have the summer where you have a higher risk of drownings.
Yeah.
But what is a higher risk in the holiday season?
There's a lot of things that are high risk.
There is. And you had sent a text, and I thought these were really neat. Obviously, the frequency that you see these patients and able to pinpoint what's wrong with them, and instead of pre-hospital, it kind of gives you a little bit of a different perspective of what to expect during the holiday season. And today we're going to be covering a different number of risks, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think, having even worked late into last night, certainly here in 2023, we're seeing a fair share of flu and COVID. Not that I care about COVID, I really don't. But flu is interesting this year. It's like flu A and B, and usually flu B is more of a summer flu with more milder symptoms, seen more in pediatrics, but I've seen it across the board, both types. RSV is much higher this year, and I mean, there's COVID, but the COVID's not like the original COVID.
Right.
So we're seeing a good bit of that. We're seeing a fair share of alcohol and drug stuff, psychiatric things that go hand in hand with the holiday season. Still seeing, the holiday heart stuff, which is usually, MIs and CHF exacerbations and things like that.
Diabetic patients.
Diabetes, certainly, uncontrolled diabetes, new onset diabetes, all that good stuff.
Overdoses.
Overdoses are off the chain, and that's mainly because people are partying more, but also kind of falls in with the psychiatric component with, suicide and things. The other thing I've seen a good bit of are some overdoses on cold medicine because they're taking it for flu and stuff. I had a guy from, let's just say he was in custody, but he came in and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. They thought maybe he was having some kind of withdrawal, but he had been there for a long time. It didn't make any sense, but when you went and examined him, it was like anticholinergic, and he was buying cold pack, like they tell you to buy a cold pack, which had some cold medicine in it and stuff, and if you take enough of that stuff, it will make you anticholinergic. He was in urinary retention, the whole shebang. So that was super interesting. Of course, you get all the Tylenol and salicylate overdoses just from taking too many. And then GI stuff. So of course, all the food poisoning, GI bugs, gallbladder disease, and such. And then ingestions of sorts. And that does fall in line with overdose. But of course, other weird ingestions like poinsettia plants, which are poisonous to animals. I suspect they must do something to humans. We should probably parse through that.
Well, if they're bad for dogs, they're probably bad for humans too.
Yeah, I wonder, although chocolate is not bad for humans, but is bad for dogs.
It's bad for humans too.
Is it though?
Just on a different scale.
Well, it's not going to kill you. Well, I guess maybe it could if you're brittle enough diabetic. Anyway, all that to say, I thought those would be good topics to kind of discuss.
I agree. Let's start with holiday heart. So we'll start holiday heart, and then we'll progress to those other ones that you were talking about. When it comes to the holiday heart, when it comes to emergencies that you see that are on the uprise in the holiday season, cardiovascular emergencies, which ones do you see? Do you see more MIs? Do you see more patients with symptomatic bradycardia? Do you see, those their arrhythmias such as narrow SVT or something like that? What are you seeing out there?
We're seeing certainly a CHF exacerbations, people that have like new onset CHF. Obviously, that's from eating all kinds of stuff that has higher in sodium this time of year. Certainly, like the broken heart syndrome, maybe not full blown Takotsubo, but certainly broken heart syndrome that can cause all kinds of stuff. Definitely, the STEMIs and NSTEMIs. I think the literature still supports that a good bit of STEMIs are in the summer, but we'd have to actually look at it.
The most interesting one that you're going to talk about today, and we've already done kind of education with our EKG series. We talked about, STEMIs, MI, ST elevation, ST depression, things like that. But I'm more curious about broken heart syndrome, Takotsubo. Let's talk about that today. What kind of EKG findings are we going to find there?
So a lot of the time, it's going to be, ST depressions, and I suppose in reality, sometimes it's normal. But a good portion of the ones that I've seen has been like ST depressions, like it's not normal. Their troponins are elevated. They can even get cardiogenic shock. I actually had a lady a few years ago that was in jazzercise class, and she had been through some kind of a crazy trauma recently. Her friend was in the class with her, and she literally V-fib arrested there. And she had Takotsubo.
What's happening to the heart when all this is going on?
It's mad. It actually changes shape, and we can put a graphic in the show notes about it. And the way it actually pumps is abnormal, and the perfusion is abnormal, and it actually looks like this basket they used to collect octopuses in Japan or something.
What causes it though?
Extreme stress, and I suspect it's probably inflammatory cascade, etc.
When we get these patients and we see these patients, what are they going to look like to us?
Probably it can vary, but probably some sort of cardiogenic shock. I think I had a lady a few years ago, whose husband was dying upstairs, and she came down, had bumped troponins and ST depressions, but she signed out AMA because she wanted to be upstairs with her husband, which I get it.
Crushing chest pain typically?
I mean, not usually, but they can have it. They can have chest pain. They can have, arrests. They'll have elevated troponins. I mean, the only way to formally diagnose this really is an echo, but most of the time they're in the cath lab.
So, a question for you. I don't really know a lot about this Takotsubo cardiomyopathy that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. So when we have this patient that presents for whatever reason we were called, maybe weakness, generalized weakness, patient maybe had a syncope
chest pain.
episode.
I mean, chest pain can still be in the
syncope episode.
Sure,
probably is very. So we get out there and we find this patient. They don't look very good to us. Maybe pale, cool, diaphoretic. Are they usually still perfusing, or what's happening?
Sometimes they'll be doing fairly well as far as perfusion goes, but a lot of the time you're going to start to see the effects of kind of that ballooning.
So you've seen both, obviously, and it's really not frequent one way or the other. What this says, the shape of the left ventricle becomes similar to the octopus trap, was what you were kind of saying before. The left ventricle kind of being smaller right there, and then enlarging almost like a octopus trap, and that's where it gets its name from.
Yeah.
Because the Japanese octopus trap is called the Takotsubo.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So we get this patient, and this is what's happening within the heart, and we see the EKG findings typically of ST depression. Is it specific leads that we're looking at?
No, the ones that I've seen have been like kind of, generalized, but I suppose it could be anything.
As a physician, when it comes to pre-hospital providers where we would suspect something like this, or maybe they had a history of something like this, what are we doing in route? Supportive care of management of blood pressure? Are you seeing, the need for a lot of pressors? What's going on?
I think the ones that we've seen, we used, it probably is a little outdated, but we've used dopamine for them, and they're not going to look great. Like you're going to go down your chest pain road. But they're probably going to be hypotensive more than anything. You're going to put the pads on and all that kind of stuff and take them to a place that can actually cath them. Because there's not going to be a way for us to really know.
And obviously it could be, a differential that you could say, but it would be purely just you getting lucky by with what
Oh,
you
yeah.
have pre-hospital.
You're still gonna,
Because there's not really specific EKG findings to say Takotsubo. This is Takotsubo, right?
yeah. But if you said to me, hey, her daughter died yesterday, or her husband's at home dying, or something, she had a trauma, like in the last, like that's a good piece of information. Because
Yeah.
what if I do everything else? I'm like, what is going on with this? She's septic? Is she this? Is she that? And it turns out to be Takotsubo.
Neat. So you're actually that piece of information that we might withhold
Yeah.
pre-hospital because
Yeah.
it's not relevant to what we think is going on could actually really steer you down a
Yeah.
treatment plan.
Yeah, because I might talk to the cardiologist and be like, hey, this could be Takotsubo. Listen, EMS said this lady, la la la, or, whatever, this guy. Da, da. I think it's more common in women. I'd have to look that up, but I really feel like it is more common.
Age range specifically?
I've seen, everybody I've seen has been basically over the age of 40, but I'm certain that's not scientific.
When you have your patient that has obviously been diagnosed with Takotsubo, have they, usually had a previous MI or
No, the lady I didn't have a previous MI, but she did heal. She did do well after.
What
the
about
Vitagraph.
what about high blood pressure? Just because when I think about the ventricle being changing shape, I just think about LVH or something like that. Did they run more risk factors?
I don't think so.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
there?
no, yeah,
And this
I don't think so.
Okay. Neat little talk on.
We'll put that slide in too.
Yeah, broken heart syndrome and Takotsubo, and also neat to know that you guys, if that little bit of information that may just seem, irrelevant to the physician and that you don't really need to provide that, it actually could help, getting that treatment plan, or at least giving that physician a high index of suspicion that this might be going on.
Right.
Okay. Diabetes. Big one within the holiday season. We love to eat. You got sausage balls out. You got the cream cheese dip. You got the cookies covered in white chocolate. My wife loves to make these. She makes she'll take the Ritz crackers. She'll put peanut butter in between those and then cover them with white chocolate. Cover them. Oh, they're so good. One of my holiday favorites. But it's no different, no surprise that we obviously are going to splurge a little bit and not eat as well when it comes to the holiday season. And unfortunately, in the country that we live in, the times that we live in, diabetes is a big risk factor for most of us nowadays. Mm-hmm. Even myself, I've had to get myself under control, make sure my A1C gets down, so I'm not in that boat as well. So obviously we don't eat the way that we're supposed to, especially during the holiday season. We're celebrating with family, and sometimes we just go a little overboard.
Yeah, I think diabetics shouldn't just sit there and eat fruits and vegetables. I think they should enjoy themselves, but I think it would, is it better to have like a protein drink or some sort of smaller meal in the morning? And the other thing that we do, which I think brings on a good bit of problems for people in general, is we eat that one gigantic meal during the middle of the day. Like at Thanksgiving, we do that all the time, which, does a lot of things. It slows down, the gut process of passing all the food slows. There's blood that shunts over to the stomach to help process that big load of food, which of course, if you have coronary artery disease, causes your vessels to constrict. Have you ever had somebody just like ate a big meal and laid down and had an MI? That's a classic story. Are
you seeing a lot of hyperglycemic patients these days?
Yeah, but I don't think people are as surprised. They know they just ate a plate of cookies. It's not.
So
they're not worried.
What are you doing for them in the hospital? Because I know what we're doing for them pre-hospital, and what we're doing pre-hospital is typically dilution. We're taking normal saline, and we're usually doing an aggressive fluid bolus. So what are you doing for these patients in the hospital? I know they're coming in, they're getting that dilution as well, but they're probably getting some support insulin as well. Are you doing anything else with them that maybe is a shocker to some of our patients, that maybe or some of our listeners that didn't know that part of that treatment?
No, really it's repleting their electrolytes too, because those all shift around when the sugar is different. And then looking for a source of infection. That's another thing that can cause somebody's sugar to go high or low. So we do that, and then fluids. And then, some re-education. It's amazing what people do when you start talking to them, even when they're there, they're like, oh yeah, I took this cold medicine that's full sugar, or I was on steroids for the last week. Well, of course that's why your sugar's out of control.
Well, that's interesting. You say cold medicine because people probably aren't thinking that's what's going to cause their sugar to go up.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I never thought of that. But when you get these patients into the hospital, when you see these patients, do you normally see them where they're real short of breath? Do you see those Kussmaul respirations?
If they're a GKA patient, if their sugar's like crazy and they're like, an HHS patient, or if they're a type 1 diabetic that hasn't been watching, we'll see it.
What are you doing for those patients' airway? Because when we go back through EMT school and we think about we know that the reason that the body is doing that is compensating, right? So when we get ready to think about airway in the diabetic patient, those are one of those patients where we're like, hey, we don't want to intubate them if we don't have to,
right?
Because that's the way they're still compensating and staying alive. So what do you do with that patient?
Well, I try not to intubate them, and sometimes their GCS is low.
GCS is low, and we're not even going to go down that route, but I'm going to go ahead. All right, Fabiano's clocked in for shift. She gets her report from the physician that's going off duty, and he says, by the way, I got somebody in triage. Sounds like we're going to bring them on back. Patient is short of breath. You get that patient in there and they tell you the story. Hey, I did this. I ate a full plate of cookies. I'm a diabetic. Or maybe they don't tell you they're a diabetic, but you go through and you do your workup and you check the sugar and it's high, and they're short of breath there, and you notice the typical Kussmaul respirations, maybe respiratory rates about 30 to 36, and they're getting a little tired. What are you going to do for this patient? Well, how do we keep that patient to be able to compensate safely, and what's going to work? What's going to happen for that patient?
So I try not to intubate them because it does. They are in distress. It takes away their drive. It takes away. There's a lot there. So they're not. They're sick and they've got this. We're taking away any adrenaline they have. But I will give them some oxygen. We'll give them fluids. Start to turn them around that way. Those types of things. They're going to probably be put on an insulin drip once I figure out what their potassium is and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of will let it ride a little bit, even if they're like GCS is lower than I'd like it to be. Now, if I have to intubate them, I'm going to set their respiratory rate pretty high.
Have you ever had to think about maybe CPAP or BiPAP on this patient, or is that just not in your wheelhouse?
Well, a lot of the time they're like vomiting and stuff and dopey.
Yeah.
And I just don't think we can.
What's an end tidal we're normally going to see on that patient? Probably pretty low.
Yeah. So the diabetes thing, I guess, all in all, it would be helpful if EMS could actually convince them to come in. That's very hard to do with diabetics a lot of the time. Start fluids also can be difficult to get a line on these people. An EKG would be helpful because if their potassium's crazy or something else, we could tell. And then, just start running the fluids and that kind of thing. But hopefully you can get them turned around pretty quick.
Do you usually admit these patients, or they're
going to be on an insulin drip? They got to be admitted. But if you're just like, and then it's higher, but nothing else, you don't look bad, I'm probably just going to fluid and then give you some insulin, maybe some potassium, and then send you home.
Okay. Moving along, we'll actually talk about, this part is where we talk about ingestions. And when we talk about ingestions, general, just anything. It doesn't have to be something where somebody's overdosed intentionally, but maybe they've accidentally taken something or eaten something that has caused them an issue. We're seeing a lot of, food allergy type stuff.
Yep.
Peanuts are always a big one.
Yes.
And peanuts are in everything when it comes to Christmas. You got your peanut brittle, you got peanut butter, that goes on everything, and those chocolate balls that are delicious. So the ability to see, an allergic reaction when it comes to an ingestion is increased in Christmas time, but also some of the things, such as toxicities you had mentioned, which I kind of find funny about the poinsettia earlier. I always was worried because we have dogs and everything.
There's a legit, there's a thing about it.
And you're not supposed to have.
But what happens to them when they eat it? Do they just get diarrhea or they die or something?
The way that I've always assumed it is basically they die. You know, I think
it's something
it's
severe
that
too.
severe. I've never, had poinsettias around my house because of that, because I have animals, and that's how severe it's always been portrayed to me. But we'll talk about general ingestions when it comes to the holiday season. The first we've already talked about, be on the lookout for those patients that might present as an anaphylactic reaction, just because of the way that the body responds nowadays. I don't know, and I'm not willing to make any assumptions when it comes to chemicals or anything like that. But you would have to agree that food allergies are a lot greater than they used to be.
Oh yeah.
Or maybe we have more education than we used to.
Yeah.
But either way, it's a bigger deal. Everybody has an EpiPen. There's EpiPens. So be on the lookout for those patients. Peanut butter's in everything.
Yeah.
Every single thing, even those delicious cookies that my wife makes. But we want to more or less talk about the ingestion. So what kind of weird ingestions could we possibly see in the Christmas season the holiday season, when instead of what we would typically not normally see as much?
Well, apparently poinsettia plants in kids and dogs are not as poisonous, but they actually cause a good bit of issues, including nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and if you touch it, it can cause a rash. And then they can even get the rash around their mouth and everything else, which is why they tell you to avoid ingesting them. So kids will eat them too, and so will dogs.
I'm trying to think things that could just happen. I think about myself when I was Christmas time. I went over to my grandmother's house. She takes several different medications.
Oh yeah. Pill ingestions all day long.
Kids getting in that stuff.
Yeah, eating coins.
Yeah.
Aspirating toys.
Are you seeing things like that?
Oh yeah, it's gonna be, and then and then of course all the battery stuff, right?
So let's just talk about one in general. All right. So my grandmother, Lord rest her soul, she had diabetes, and she also had a little bit of blood pressure issues. But let's just say she takes a beta blocker. And I go over there, and as a kid, I'm getting into that kind of stuff, and maybe I pick up the pill bottle and not knowing what it is, and I take a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
What? All right, I get to the hospital, and my heart rate is
12.
Yeah. What are you doing for me?
Well, I mean,
is that the kind of stuff you see, or is it?
No, I mean, we can see a good bit of that, even the calcium channel blocker overdoses and such. And, at that point, you got to get an IV. You got to start giving some reversal agents, for a beta blocker.
So glucagon.
Yep.
And so.
Probably need pressors.
Are we going to, so on a beta blocker, are we just going to do glucagon, or are we going to do sodium bicarb too? Or are you guys doing sodium?
I mean, they probably would do both.
Yeah.
I'd imagine.
All right. So typically, though, when we think about beta blocker overdoses, we're thinking about that glucagon with the IV instead of IM with this one.
Yes.
And why does it work?
Yeah, why does it work?
I don't know.
You don't know why glucagon works?
No, ma'am.
You don't know why it's a reversal agent either?
No.
I think it just stabilizes. I don't know if it actually gets rid of everything, because I think you have to use pressors. So glucagon for beta blocker overdose. Oh, look, it's like a very common. You need a continuous infusion. Yeah, it enhances myocardial contractility, heart rate, and AV conduction.
So tell us what that means.
So it sounds like it supports what the beta blocker is suppressing.
Okay.
So that
makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. They say it's the drug of choice, but they say 50 micrograms per kg IV is the loading dose, and then a continuous infusion of 1 to 15 mg per hour titrated to response.
And that's a general treatment based off of Google, not your standing order. So always remember, follow your standing orders based off of what you're supposed to do. This is just research we're doing on the side.
It says glucagon's mechanism of action may be, because nobody entirely knows, that it bypasses the beta receptor site, and it can consider it as an alternative profound beta blocker intoxications. If you think about that, that would make sense. Like, how would it work unless it works directly on a different sites?
Okay. Yeah,
And
that
so
makes
now-
sense.
Yeah, that would have to make sense.
All right. And then
Interesting.
we got we talked about calcium channel. So again,
Oh.
calcium,
You're gonna have calcium,
With some sodium bicarb. Remember, they don't mix very well.
right?
So we got to do,
Yes.
so maybe some normal saline in between those if we only have one line.
Yeah, and then, of course, you're going to have the pads on the patient. Of course, you're going to have pressors and supportive stuff as well.
Is calcium channel blockers, are you guys usually doing calcium and sodium bicarb as well?
Yeah, I'm usually doing a ton of calcium. It's a lot.
What about and then, we got to talk about at least the one that we probably see the most, and that's our opioid overdoses.
I know.
Or opiate overdoses, or opioid, whichever one you want to say. But you see quite a bit of those too, just because of the popularity of those drugs and the availability, and the Christmas season too.
I know.
It seems to
Triggers a lot of stuff.
it does, and you don't never know how somebody's going to handle something. You don't know what people are going through either. Just last year, my wife's first Christmas without her father. I imagine it was quite, hard for her.
Yeah.
So you don't know how they're going to handle it, of course. But anyways, yeah, opioid overdoses.
Narcan is everywhere. I find it to be interesting since we give them, obviously it's on grant money or whatever, but Narcan is carried by so many people, and we try to hand it out to people all the time in the emergency room, and even prescribe it when we're prescribing opioids. And did you know that I was at Publix the other day, and you had to pay $50 for Narcan to buy it off the shelf at the pharmacy? $49.99.
That you didn't have to have a prescription?
Well, it didn't say so, and there was a price tag. It said $49.99.
Interesting.
Why is that $49.99?
Probably because it's so available.
Oh my God.
Because you think about you prescribing somebody pain medication in the hospital, you're probably going to prescribe them Narcan.
Well, no, that should be. It should be free. It should be on the wall like an AED is.
Well, you write your local congressman.
Oh my God. Anyway, yeah, it's a lot. The other thing to consider for ingestions, besides like this stuff that kids put in their mouth, like the button batteries, the toy parts, and things like that, are also when they get into other people's stuff, or grandma gets into it, and so they eat the pop brownies, or they eat the Delta 8 gummies.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Ooh.
it's way better for a patient's family, or whatever, to just be honest about what was around,
Right.
because it's a lot of work to like backtrack and figure it out.
When we're talking about the opioid overdoses, and because you had talked about Narcan, obviously, hey guys, remember, we're going to support that patient's airway. We know that patient's respiratory depressed,
Right.
Probably going to be hypoxic, cyanotic,
Right.
Could be unresponsive. But yes, remember to oxygenate these patients very well. And that's the priority there. We do want to get that, antagonist on board.
Right.
But that is the priority, is that we support airway.
Yeah.
And let's think about this responsibly too. Let's support airway and think about the patient that may have overdosed, and especially if they've been dependent on this drug for quite a while. Or we're in the business of making the patient feel better,
Right.
We're in the business of that. So if it is something that they have a dependency on, you need to be very responsible with your Narcan.
I think that I was just going to say that. Now, unless somebody's like respiratory rate is 0 and they're about to code them, and this is like, that's different ballgame.
That's not
But like,
responsible.
if you're like maybe respiratory depressed, but you took too many of your oxy or whatever, you don't need to give them 2 or 4 milligrams of Narcan. They're just gonna poop all over your animals.
Yeah, throw up,
and
poop,
vomit.
or whatever, and
Yeah.
And the
I agree
other
with
thing,
that.
just be responsible. Be responsible. And when I talk about being responsible, and you can dig off of this if you disagree, is when we're doing that Narcan administration, we're purely just trying to get back a respiratory drive
Right.
that is sufficing. that would be normal for a normal human being.
Right.
Like we want to get that respiratory rate back up to about 12 to 20.
Yeah.
And we want them to be able to oxygenate. We want them to be able to protect their airway. But being able to do that responsibly is a big deal for me.
Yeah, it goes right
EMS.
back to just because you can do something, should you do something?
Well, the reason that I think about it a little bit different now is the patient that I come into contact with. I always want to be able to, my goal to end is that patient sees a physician in the day they see me. That's every patient that I go out to. That makes me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And now I know everybody doesn't have to do that, but
Right.
that makes me feel better. If I can get the patient to see a physician
Yeah.
prior to,
Right.
within the meeting that you had with me. So but I think about how hard this must be, especially for a patient that is dependent upon heroin or an opioid. If I go in and I completely reverse that right there, and maybe I wake them up and I tell them, hey, listen, we had to wake you up. What'd you take? And they say, well, I took some heroin or I took some oxy or whatever. And they're looking at me and they feel like garbage because I've completely wiped out everything. And I'm like, okay, listen, you were unresponsive. I had to do this to wake you up. I would really feel a lot better if you would go see a physician. And I could think that patient would probably be thinking the whole time, well, I would really feel a lot better if you would get out of my house so I could do this again because I feel very bad.
Yeah.
So it could work in your favor of being able to get that patient to continue to treat, because they would probably be like, listen, I have completely dumped all the opioid that was in my system based off of what you gave me.
Right.
Not blaming you, but I would feel better if you'd get out of my house so I could make myself not feel bad again. So I always think about it that way. Does that make sense?
And then also saying, hey, like maybe even, there are EMS agencies around that are starting Suboxone on these people. They have to have a COWS scale, which is something, of course, all of these things that we're referencing pictures-wise, Narcan, and we'll have Ellie put in the show notes. But I think, the COWS scale is, something greater than, I think it's 8, then they can get a dose of Suboxone. You don't want to put, somebody has to kind of be in mild withdrawal to get that. If they're not, then they actually get put into withdrawal. So it's not very helpful that way. But a lot of agencies are starting the Suboxone in the streets thing, which is not necessarily a bad idea. The other thing is you could always tell them, like, hey, if you see a doctor, they could get you something to help you. They could start you on some medicine. I think the tides have turned some in our treatment regarding this opioid epidemic. I mean, physicians, because before it was like, we can't give you anything. We'd give you, like clonidine or something like that, and some Zofran and all that kind of stuff. But like with the advent of Suboxone, with the advent of the opioid epidemic and the support and the attention it's gotten, I think a lot of us have been trained to that we need to treat it as a disease process, addiction, and that we actually should give more than just the fluids and all that stuff to help them feel better, but actually give them a medicine that could help them and get them plugged in with services. There's a ton of services out there.
That's really neat. The stance that we've taken, I imagine that's probably very political, just because because people think about things a little bit different, but it's okay. It's okay that everybody has an opinion. But on the last thing, I'd like to take it down just a notch, and let's just talk for a sec, because the one that we're going to talk about last is it's a little personal, and it's personal because the holiday season. We'll go ahead and cue some nice background Christmas music there. The holiday season is supposed to be a wonderful time.
Yeah,
it really is. It's a time where we bring family in, and maybe they travel from different parts of the world, or maybe we haven't seen them in forever. Maybe we only see them one time a year, and we always, we watch Home Alone and we watch Christmas Vacation, and we all get together and we probably play games, and then we go
spread around the flu.
Yeah, spread around the flu, COVID.
Yeah.
And we have wonderful things to eat, and everybody brings a plate, and everybody gets fed. But it doesn't happen that way for everybody.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't happen that way for everybody, and that's probably the last one we're going to talk about today. And unfortunately, not everybody sees the holidays as a happy time.
Right.
And maybe it's because of something that is going on within their life right now. They, and sometimes people know about it, sometimes nobody knows about it.
Yeah.
But the way that they handle that sometimes kind of leads them to our next thing, and that's going to be our mental health crises that could even progress to our suicides. And unfortunately, we probably see an uptick in those. And that's probably the saddest part of the holiday season, working EMS prior to the position that I'm in now. You would see things like that happen, and you would say, I hate that's what they're going through. But that's a cascading effect, because not only was there an effect on the patient that, but it's going to affect the family and any future things as well, as the holiday season continues to go through. So you see maybe some of those, an uptick in that, just because it's a busy time. We've made it so we've commercialized the holidays like nobody's business. And my wife was even telling me the other day, I'm so stressed about getting Christmas gifts. And I'm like, well, you can stop.
Like, who cares?
Yeah, you can stop, because that's not the intent.
Yeah, I understand it when you have children, because it's like the end of your world. But by the way, of course, they'll tell you that Santa got the wrong color. Like, they'll just crush your soul.
Right.
But agreed. The other thing to consider is that also the downward effects of a suicide are huge. Like the impact it has on the rest of the family, the risk that it then transcends to anybody else in the family that has mental health issues is a big deal. And of course, our providers, ER doctors, and EMS providers have a huge suicide rate. They also have a huge substance abuse problem.
I'm glad that you said that, because that's one thing that I didn't mention that I think that we need to put a little bit more emphasis on is the providers. They see this, and they see it because they want to be the person to help, but how that affects their mental health as well
it's a big deal
during this holiday season is very is something that I think we need to make sure that we're putting an emphasis into.
That's right.
But that's about it for our holiday buffet. We give you kind of a smorgasbord, just to kind of rehash of what we talked about today. Started off the day with Takotsubo Holiday Heart. Yep. Be on the lookout of those patients. See a little bit of an uprise there. Good thing to differentials and things like that when you're going through. Fabiano kind of said some ST depression on the EKG. But one thing that kind of sticks out to her when EMS comes in is what's happened within that patient's life here recently.
Yeah, y'all always have extra information.
So that little extra information goes a long way. Then we talked about diabetics, and we talked about mostly the hyperglycemic ones, airway protection considerations there. We went into ingestions, and that being ingestions of any kind. If you have dogs and you like me, keep poinsettia plants out of your house.
Apparently, kids will eat them too. I don't know why. I feel like they would taste nasty.
Yeah, they would.
Yeah. I'm not going to try them, but it looked like it tastes nasty.
Same. And then we finally finished up with something that was maybe a little bit more personal, and that would be, our mental health, far as what Christmas is and the holiday season has kind of turned into. It's and we got to bring back the fact of what it is for, what it's intended for, and what's so great about it. Great thing is that you can get together with those family members and celebrate, but just remember, everybody doesn't have that ability,
right?
And you may see that uptick in those mental health patients, and don't let that take you by surprise. And if you see something that bothers you, and you see something that finally the message is to talk to someone.
Yes.
As a provider, you're not expected to try to handle this all on your own all the time. Hopefully, your employer, wherever you work, has a program But if not, you know, you can always contact either one of us. And
That's right.
It's not that we're going to be the best at listening, but maybe we have an avenue that we can get
That's right.
somebody some help. I definitely want our listeners to know that we do care.
That's right.
We care about you, and we want to care about how you process information.
We are really looking forward to 2024.
It's going to be fun.
Big things are coming.
It's going to be fun. I think I was looking at the website the other day, and I'm okay with the learning management system right now, but I would like to, you know from our listeners if there's things that we can make things a little easier to navigate through some of these programs.
Yeah.
We're more than willing to try. I'm not saying we can do it.
Right.
But we don't know if we don't know it's a problem unless you tell us. You know.
I would love people to submit EKGs and interesting cases because that's something I love to look at. And then Ellie will put slides in of all the stuff that we've talked about.
Yeah, we're trying to make sure we'll try to do better with the little snippets that we put on social media too. I think people like those a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, and I guess you've seen where we did our first contest, Christmas contest.
I know how to go.
So we're still allowing people to enter, and Facebook, we've got a lot of people that have entered, and then Instagram, not so many, but Instagram's really not that platform.
Right.
But if you know people and tag those folks in there, that's the only thing you got to do to enter, and we'll send you some challenge coins. I stole all of them from Aaron.
Yes.
So either way,
nicely done.
We wish you a Merry Christmas.
Yes, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
We hope you have a good holiday, and hopefully you don't run into too many of these patients. But if you do, think about some of the things we talked about today.
Right.
Merry Christmas,
Merry
everyone.
Christmas. Signing off.